So in this session, I'm going to be talking about the mistakes I made that hindered my recovery at a certain point. I'll talk about how I uncovered the sticking points, the strategies that helped me, and how changing my approach made a difference. Take the points that apply to you, disregard the ones that don't. I want to say something about the word mistakes. If you notice in this, in my iPad, I've put miss-takes. Any ideas why I've done that? What the significance of that is? Pop your answer in the chat and I'll let you know in a bit. The first thing that really got in the way of my recovery is not understanding why I got sick and what was keeping me sick. Now, this was important because with the benefit of hindsight, I can make sense of why I got sick. And also I have a better understanding of why I wasn't recovering. Penny's guessing things you have learned takes. You're on the right lines. If you think about filmmaking, movie making, then they use the word take. Take 1, take 2, 25. And they do that because they expect for it not to be perfect and they might have to do another take. Okay, so a mistake is just that we've had a go, didn't quite work out, and we're going to do something different. We're going to try again, or we're going to have another go, I should say, rather than try again. All right. So, as I say, the first thing that I think was really important for me was to understand why I got sick. And not understanding why I got sick, just didn't really help me get some sense of what might help me recover. And the second thing was why I stayed sick. And these two were related, okay? Consider that before I got sick, I was a worrier. I was very good at self-criticism, and that resulted in feelings of depression at times. I was a people pleaser. I was a hedonist. I did have the tendency to burn the candles at both ends. So those were pre-existing factors, but when I took on a really stressful job, then that combination of factors, including a very stressful job, just actually was too much for my system, all right? So when I had a less stressful job, I could get away to some extent with those stressful behaviours. But the combination of the job and those things just meant that, it was too much for my system. Question arises, why wasn't I getting well? Why did I get sick? Key things were that I was experiencing sustained periods of stress. We all experience stress, but in an ideal situation, there's a beginning and then there's an end. And usually we hope it's a short-term thing, but if it becomes a long-term thing, that is actually putting strain on the body. And in my case, the stress caused physical dysfunction. My digestive system wasn't working properly. I developed conditions like leaky gut and candida, which the medical profession doesn't, in general, accept as, valid conditions. But when I looked into these conditions and they were diagnosed by a doctor, then these explanations did make sense. Being in that state of stress, activating the sympathetic nervous system, a lot of the time kept me from recovering. It stopped my body from recovering. So the dysfunction was a result of the sympathetic nervous system being switched on too much of the time. Okay, so as a result of not really understanding that key thing that, the stress was keeping me sick, I tried lots of treatments. Not necessarily a bad thing, because sometimes for some people these things can be a game changer. I'm aware that some people have a very either or approach about healing conditions like ME/CFS. It's either this or that. And actually, I believe in kind of both and approach. I believe, for instance, it's useful to optimize my nutrition because having suboptimal nutrition can put a stressor on the body. If you haven't watched the documentary Supersize Me, where Morgan Spurlock eats McDonald's for, I can't remember for how long, maybe a month, 2 months, it really had bad effects on his function, and his doctor was really worried that I think his liver was just turning to mush because it couldn't cope with all the rubbish that he was eating. All right, so I believe that it's useful to try those things because we want to reduce the amount of stress on the body, but I believe it's useful to take an integrated approach. Okay, so it was useful for me to change my diet. It was probably useful to take some supplements, but if I was still in a very stressed state, which I was, it's a bit like putting high quality fuel in your car, but driving with your foot on the floor 120 miles. You're going to use that fuel up very quickly. If you've got a full tank of petrol, gas as you call it in the American continent, if you drive at 120 miles an hour, you're not going to get as far as if you drive at 56 miles an hour. You'll get further on that same tank of gas. Okay, as I say, I tried lots of interventions, nutrition, herbalism. Some of them were useful. Cranial osteopathy, acupuncture, for instance, actually made me feel more relaxed. But after a couple of days, it's almost like I switched the stress response back on. Okay, so I needed to address the underlying stressors. Okay, and actually the next point is that I didn't address my personal stressors. So I didn't identify and address those stressors. This included those things I mentioned already, the things I had pre-mecfs, that I was a worrier, a people pleaser. I was very good at self-criticism, burning the candle at both ends, being hedonist. But I was also, when I had mecfs, I wasn't really resting when I was resting. Okay, I was lying in bed, but I wasn't resting. I was stressing. Okay, and now I do hear some practitioners say that people with mecfs spend too much time in the parasympathetic state. But that's not my experience, because often when I talk to people, it's really clear that when they're lying in bed, they're not actually activating the parasympathetic state. They're in a stressed state. I didn't, for instance, at one point break the pattern of boom and bust. I was continually in that state of boom and bust. Again, that was hindering my recovery. I was often in resistance rather than acceptance. I was frustrated with myself for overdoing it rather than just accepting that, that's just normal. That's part of being human, that we make mistakes. Okay. Next thing, key thing, is I didn't really have a kind of recovery plan. At one point I didn't really have any plan at all. I was kind of a bit chaotic. Over time I did create kind of a plan that was, I had kind of periods of rest and periods of activity. Okay, and I got into more of a rhythm. Okay, and how long I kind of rested for changed over time. Initially, when I was off sick, I was completely depleted, and I was resting for about 3 hours in the morning, 3 hours in the afternoon. As I got better, that got smaller. Got it to, at one point, 1 hour in the morning, 1 hour in the afternoon, half an hour after dinner, and then that shrunk even more to half an hour. Okay, now my goal is to meditate for 20 minutes twice a day. All right. So I didn't have a recovery plan. I didn't have a daily rhythm of activity, rest, meditation, relaxation. When I was doing stuff, whether it was preparing food or doing some activity, I wasn't necessarily doing it in a mindful way. I was often doing it in a stressed way. And we were talking about this in the group coaching, that it's really important to be mindful of how we're doing tasks. And in a Facebook Live I did a couple of weeks ago, I talked about this, that healing can happen when you're doing the washing up, when you're preparing your veg. Because if you're doing that in a slow, relaxed way, that is supporting your body's healing. But unfortunately, a lot of the time, as I say, I was stressing when I was resting. I was stressing when I was not resting. And that made it very difficult for the body to heal. Okay? So having a plan, even if it's something that you kind of create yourself based on some of the stuff I'm sharing, can be helpful. Thinking about how you want to start your day, how you want to end your day. All right? What are your rituals to support your healing? For instance, one of the things I do first thing when I wake up is I lie in bed and I meditate for 10 minutes. Often set a timer and just meditate for 10 minutes before I start my day. Okay, and the next thing I do, as many of you will know if you've been watching my videos, get up, have a drink, and I do some exercise. So that's how I start my day, to get a good start to the day. The next thing is that I didn't really have kind of the full suite of tools and strategies that I needed to support recovery. If you think about the carpenter has a whole range of tools in their toolbox. Sometimes they need to use the saw, the hammer, the chisel, etc. In the same way, what I realised, I needed tools to help me process emotions. I did have some knowledge of that because I was trained as a counsellor, but some of the tools I had weren't fit for the job. Because what I recognised when I started learning brain training techniques is that I needed a tool that I could use on a moment-by-moment basis to help me identify when I was activating the stress response and know how to calm my physiology, okay, and correct that response, okay. I needed those tools to help me calm my physiology. I needed strategies to help me shift my mindset. So, for example, I talked just now about being in resistance rather than acceptance. And that's a practice. That it's something we can cultivate, the ability to be more accepting of things rather than resisting. Some of the mistakes I made was driven by a kind of mindset that wasn't very helpful. For instance, was body checking, focusing on symptoms. So when I wake up, the first thing I do, pop a yes in the chat if you recognise this is something you've done, is I'd wake up. Initially, I'd be in a completely relaxed state. I'd be very present. But then as soon as I was kind of conscious and kind of saying to myself, oh yeah, I've got mecfs, then I would start checking my body for symptoms and then feeling a bit helpless. And actually, it's really interesting. There was that moment when I woke up when my mind and body was completely still before those kind of unhelpful habitual patterns kicked in, all right? And it affected my physiology. So, and I've talked about this before, that there were times when I made the decision to train to become a practitioner, I started stressing because I was thinking, am I really ready to do this? It's a lot of money. I did the brain training techniques a couple of months before, and I wasn't quite sure that I was ready to do this. And I'd literally wake up in the night completely, my body was locked up in tension, feeling lots of symptoms. The next night I woke up and I was completely relaxed because I've been practicing using these tools. I woke up, and as I just mentioned, my kind of thinking mind kicked in, and I went from a state of relaxation to a complete state of stress and tension in my body, symptoms, in a nanosecond. Okay, and the next night I woke up again completely relaxed, And it was as if I caught myself about to flick the switch and turn on all the stress. And I didn't turn on the stress. And my body stayed relaxed. Okay? So that's an example of how powerful our minds are. You may have your own experiences of that. Okay? Penny saying, yes, I've done that in the past. Okay? And actually, I've just mentioned something which is about how we use language. All right? One of the mistakes that people make. I wasn't big on this, but if you think about, I remember Louise Hay talking about the way people were depicting and talking about AIDS. Okay, and there were adverts, and it was in actually big grey writing, big capital letters. It was kind of big and scary. And what she suggested is that actually we need to change our language. Rather than making it big, problematic, rather than big ME, CFS, capital letters, and I do this sometimes and sometimes I forget, is to kind of talk about it in lowercase, all right? Making it not such a big a thing. And instead of saying, some people, I didn't really do this. Some people kind of use language that implies that it's part of my identity. I have ME. I am an ME sufferer. What's the difference between those two statements? Okay, I have ME. I'm experiencing ME. I'm an ME sufferer. What would you say is the difference between those two statements? Give you a moment to comment in the chat. If you've just joined, then do say hi. What's the difference between those statements? I have ME/CFS. I'm experiencing ME/CFS. I am an ME sufferer. Okay. I'm sure someone is frantically typing, but I'll give you... You are not the illness, but experiencing it. Yeah, anytime we use the words I am, that's saying something about our identity, okay? If we say I'm experiencing, there's the implication that this is for now. It's not necessarily forever, okay? Even the word I have, there might be the connotation that is at the moment, or that might be that it sounds as if it's a kind of permanent thing. And I remember someone saying, I can't go swimming because it drains me. And I kind of thought, okay, that sounds a bit permanent. What if you were saying, at the moment my body isn't tolerating swimming? That's leaving the door open to the possibility that in the future your experience might be different. And actually, when I went swimming, I did find it draining, and I thought, okay, for now I can't swim, but I did get back to swimming. Okay, so we need to think about the language we're using, whether we're making it big, catastrophic. Even the words crash and dip. Sometimes you might say, well, actually, I do genuinely feel I am in a bit of a crash rather than just a dip. But we need to just be mindful of what language we're using. Penny saying, yeah, like that, at the moment. Okay, that makes it temporary. Okay, one of the things I get clients to talk about, say, up until now, or in the past, I generated fatigue. What are you generating right now? Because here's the thing, if someone says, I have ME/CFS, or I am an ME sufferer, it's kind of making it this kind of big... Let's see if we can colour that in a bit more. It's making it this big thing, all right? And actually, that makes it seem kind of bit immovable, etc. Now, if someone says, actually, yeah, there are periods of when I have felt fatigue, etc. But actually, there are also periods when I've felt good, and they might have lasted for quite a bit of time. They might have been short things, but actually, if we recognize that there were periods where we were feeling good, feeling normal. People say this to me, oh, actually, I kind of felt normal for an hour. Okay, then how different is that picture where there's a variety of experience, and it's not just about this kind of big immovable thing that we can't shift. If we start to recognize there are periods where we've kind of felt okay, then that starts to kind of change the picture. Does that make sense? All right, so we need to really think about whether we're using language that implies permanence or this is temporary, this is fluctuating. Okay, so the next thing, let's keep going. Oops, sorry, I didn't want to do that. I wanted to do that. Just done it again. Cut. Okay, that's what I wanted to do. So the next thing is that I didn't find my tribe, and when I first had ME/CFS, I didn't even have a computer. So nowadays there's lots of lovely positive Facebook groups. You can find a tribe where people are encouraging, supportive, positive. And if you are in any groups that are doom and gloom, I'd politely suggest that you leave those groups. Okay. So in terms of things that I did right, I did eventually create some structures. I did work on breaking the patterns of boom and bust and developed a kind of more sustainable approach to doing movement and activity. I did work on building a healthier relationship to myself, where I wasn't being so hard and self-critical, being more compassionate, being more forgiving. There are times when I've literally felt symptoms that made me think, oh, I'm going to have flu for the next 2 weeks. And I would use a process to just tune in, and I'd notice the tension in my body, and I'd recognize that the emotion that was in my body was frustration towards myself. Okay? Sometimes that frustration was towards others because they'd do behaviors that resulted in me generating stress. Okay? But ultimately I realized I needed to kind of work on me and not focus on them. They're just doing their stuff, doing their behaviors because they're wounded. I needed to focus on working on my responses. And actually I realized when I was generating that frustration in my body that was creating lots of tension, I needed to be more forgiving. Okay? And when I did that, what I would find is that this happened on a number of occasions, that those sensations that I thought were going to last for 2 weeks, 3 or 4 hours later, they disappeared. Literally, those flu symptoms had gone. Okay, I'm not saying that's always going to happen, but I have had that experience. Okay, so I needed to work on building a healthy relationship to myself. Did start doing that. Started finding balance between trying too hard and not, having any kind of system at all, which that was me at one point. I'd say I did do a live training a couple of weeks ago on making time for healing, so check that out on Facebook and YouTube. Okay, I did start working on making the shift from fear, okay, being in a state of fear, to state of trust. And when I did that, again, that supported my healing. Okay, moved from fear to trust. Okay, oops. And that was ongoing work, still ongoing work. All right. Couple more things. Actually, let's just pause a second. Let's just find out what so far can you relate to. What are the things I've mentioned so far that you think, yeah, I can relate to that? That was kind of what I was doing, or I am doing to some extent. And it's okay, we can, if we're compassionate towards ourselves, then we can kind of acknowledge and recognize the patterns that are getting in the way. And that's really important, to connect to that kind of wise part of ourselves and spot the patterns that are getting in the way. Becoming aware of them, accepting that we're doing those behaviors without judgment. I find that working on going from fear to trust is ongoing work. See the importance for self-compassion. Fantastic. All right. So a couple more things. The next thing I didn't do, but then I started mastering this, is, didn't implement consistently. Okay, consistently. So even when I had the tools and strategies, I didn't always implement them in a consistent way. That took work and practice. Okay. And final thing is that I didn't get help when needed. Okay, what I realized is I was trying different strategies. And actually, I should say I didn't get the right help, because I was getting help from different practitioners, but some of these things were interventions which, like, massage, osteopathy, craniosteopathy, acupuncture, which were all really useful. They got me in a relaxed state, but I was still switching the stress back on. Okay, so I needed the tools that would help me get my body into a relaxed state, breaking those patterns. And some of those patterns were very habitual. So at one point, I was very good at generating unhelpful responses that were keeping my body in stress. Okay. And it took practice to stop going down that pathway to the unhelpful responses, anxiety, catastrophizing, worrying, because I was really good at that. I was good at that even before I got mecfs. So to actually interrupt those unhelpful patterns and to start cultivating more helpful responses took practice. But the good news is that the way the brain works, neuroplasticity, whatever we practice, we get good at. Okay. Now, I know some people will say, oh yeah, getting help, that's all well and good, but, my funds are tight. And I appreciate that. At the moment I am doing a kind of donation group coaching. So if you'd like to know more about that, get in touch. I also did mention to a few people that I might do a training on ways of making money, because now that I've had to learn stuff, I'm still learning stuff about marketing. There are some brilliant marketers out there. This is something I'm having to learn. But I've learned a lot about ways of making money. And, if I could go back to having mecfs, there was a time when I couldn't do any kind of activity that might be income generating because I was completely depleted. But if you'd like me to talk about that, because I've now got quite a lot of knowledge and I've got resources, I know people who I definitely would go to if I wanted to know more about that. Comment in the chat, maybe put a $sign or a £sign or a euro sign, depending where you are in the world. So Penny's saying, yeah, would love to hear about that, making money. Yeah, because here's the thing. Sometimes I chat to people and they say, I spend about 8 hours a day online. And I think, wow, if you're on the computer online 8 hours a day, that's a full-time job. All right. So, okay, Penny's saying yes to that. So, all right, let's pause there. If you've got any comments, any questions, pop them in the chat. Tag me. Feel free to send me a private message if you've got any questions. One of the things actually I didn't mention, but in relation to kind of identifying personal stressors, I have created a free training which helps you identify some of your stressors by doing a few audits. If you'd like that training, pop audit in the chat. Pop the word audit in the chat, or send me a private message. Comment below if you're watching on YouTube, and I will send you the link so you can do the audit. Feel free to always send me a message. Sometimes I don't get notifications that people have commented. So let's pause there. Maybe we'll do a 1-minute relaxation. So if you'd like that, I invite you to close your eyes, obviously only if it's safe to do so. And just make yourself comfortable. Ensure that your hands and feet are in a comfortable position. Okay, so Mari Singh sounds good regarding ways of making money. Penny says, thanks, you are welcome. So I invite you just to take a breath, focus on your breath. As you breathe in through your nose, as long as that's comfortable, breathing into your belly, breathing out your nose. I'd like you just to adjust your posture. Imagine there's a thread at the top of your head, just improving your posture. I was at a meditation class recently, and when the chap said, let's talk about posture, everyone in the room straightened up. So as you breathe in and out, slowly, quietly, I'd like you just to recognize that you do within you have that capacity for wisdom, for patience, for perspective, for pragmatism, acceptance, calm, compassion, and trust. You have the capacity to learn from your mistakes and recognize that you had a go. You can give yourself a pat on the back for that, and you can have another go. You recognize that some things just need more work. If I boom and bust, then I think, okay, just need to work on that. With practice, I'll master that also. I invite you just to put a smile on your face. As you go through those steps, just breathing in a nice, slow, rhythmic way, adjusting your posture, connecting to that part of you that has the capacity for wisdom. You might call it your authentic self, your wise self, your true self, your whole self, your higher self, or something else. As you breathe in and out, putting a smile on your face, you're just inviting your mind, your body, your physiology to activate the parasympathetic response. Just knowing you can do that anytime you choose to take a moment to pause, to breathe, to focus on your breath. And by practicing that, you can become better at doing that. So thanks everybody for participating. If you found this useful, do like, share, comment if you're watching the replay. If you'd like more tips, do join my Facebook group, MECFS Explored. Subscribe on YouTube. You're welcome. So thanks everybody. Wishing you great health. Keep up the great work. You've got this. Keep going. Bye for now.